Interesting self-defense tools from history, part 1. Oh, and this is a new idea that I had, so if you're liking this content, let me know in the comment. This is a lantern shield from the Italian Renaissance. It consists of a buckler-sized shield, along with a gauntlet, a few spikes, and an awesome sword. But its defining characteristic was that it housed a lantern within the shield so that it would glow from the inside. Now, historically, it was rather common for fencers to be trained with a lantern as a sidearm. The goal was to blind your opponents in the early morning so you can take your thrusting stab. The goal of a piece like this is likely to have tried to combine the most effective aspects of European wordplay. Lantern, sword, shield, all in one. Like a Swiss Army knife, but for warplay. This thing is a monstrosity, but honestly, if it was as effective as we'd like to believe it would be, you probably would have heard of it before. Want more cool content like this? Let me know by hitting that follow button. Interesting self-defense tools of history, part 2. This interesting little guy is known as a Kukri. You may have seen Mila Jovovich wield dual Kukris in a Resident Evil film. Fun fact, I actually helped train her for this film. Kukris were most famously carried by the Gurkhas. They're a bunch of badass Filipino special forces type warriors that helped us a lot in World War II. The Kukri's stellar cutting power comes from its shape. You see how the point extends further out from the handle? This means that by the time you get to the strongest point of your swing, you've already entered its target with an initial cut. Once the initial incision has been made, the target is then guided by the shape of the blade into the belly along here. Despite being anywhere from a quarter to half the size of a more popular katana, it's been known to lop off limbs with just as much efficiency, which make them an awesome asset in the jungle brush of the Filipino island. Remember, if you guys are liking this content, go ahead and let me know by commenting here, and go ahead and give me a follow for old time's sake. Interesting self-defense tools of history, part 3. For more cool historical weapons content, click that follow button. This is a Macaquito, found in Mesoamerica, common-day Mexico, used by the Aztec and the Maya, as well as surrounding tribes. If you play Mortal Kombat, you've definitely seen this weapon. This baby consists of a wood plank surrounded by sharpened obsidian rock. The indigenous tribes used it against the Spanish during their conquest of Mexico. Because of the fragility of volcanic glass, it wasn't uncommon for this weapon to leave shards of rocks in its victims' wounds. Knowing this, the tribes would often line the rocks with poison, urine, or even poop. Nicknamed the Obsidian Chainsaw, the wood plank gave the weapon considerable mass when swung. Definitely a worthy entry in this ongoing series. Like what you saw? Let me know you want to see more by commenting and following. Interesting self-defense tools of history, part 4. Make sure you follow and comment to keep this series going. This interesting little darling is called the man catcher. It was a polearm used in 18th century Europe to drag people off of horses, not ostriches. Basically, these top 2 flaps right here are spring-loaded on one side, so you can easily push it against the neck of someone riding a horse and pull them without that head being able to escape. And though these spikes look dangerous, the weapon sort of assumes that the rider is going to be wearing armor. So the spikes would mainly keep the head in place while you pinned your enemy against the ground, sort of like a tool a dog catcher would use. Now, if you wanted to kill somebody, you'd most likely just use a spear, so it was more likely that this weapon was used to contain somebody, capture somebody, and use them for ransom. The Japanese have a similar weapon known as a sasumara. The main difference between the two being that the man-catcher's spring-loaded technology allowed you to pull, while the sasumara only allowed you to thrust. Got any good idea for future installments? Let me know in the comments. Interesting self-defense tools of history, part 5. To get past and future installments in this series, make sure you click that follow button. So this elegant little beauty is known as a Chakram, probably most popularized contemporarily by Xena, warrior princess. But historically it was carried by the Hindu god Vishnu. This projectile throwing weapon native to India consisted of a sharpened outer edge with a blunt inner circle. The Sikhs were known to wear this weapon as jewelry around their arms and necks. But unlike what our favorite Amazonian would have you believe, this weapon was not thrown disc or frisbee-like. It was actually twirled around the finger along the blunt or inside of the chakram, then whipped out to release. Though sometimes they were thrown vertically by pinching it between your thumb and your forefinger and whipping it like a ninja star. Are you digging this content? Let me know by hitting the like button. Oh, and if you have any ideas for future installments, the comments section is all ears. Interesting self-defense tools of history, part 6. I'll make you a deal. If this is the weirdest weapon you've ever seen, you gotta hit follow by the end. This batshit crazy fella is known as the Indian Urumi. It's a half-whip, half-sword hybrid native to modern-day Sri Lanka. It was rigid enough to hold an edge like a sword, but flexible enough to go around things like shields just like a whip. They would wear these babies around their waist like a belt and then draw it just as they would a sword, but it would unwrap all around their waist. It had the handle of the more notable and well-known Indian talwar, but would sometimes have several of these flexible blades cemented into one handle. What the? Because this weapon necessitated the mastery of both sword and whip, it was one of the last weapons taught to a student of Kloropeatu. Kloropeatu is one of the world's oldest martial arts. Alright guys, we made a deal. Weirdest weapon equals follow. Interesting self-defense tools of history, part 7. Honestly, this one's a little bit of a cheat, but if you're a Japanese sword fan, you gotta hit follow. This absolute beast of a samurai-style sword is known as the Norimitsu Odachi. Discovered in the 15th century, she's over 13 feet long and weighs about 35 pounds. Its size made it impossible to wield by any normal human, which led people to speculate about the existence of giants, or perhaps by the Japanese spirit known as the Gashadoko. It was more likely, though, that this was a feat of craftsmanship in order to display the expert sword-making skills of an individual sword maker. I'm calling this a cheat because it was never used for self-defense purposes. That is, unless you believe in giants. Alright guys, if you're enjoying this series, make sure you're liking and commenting, and to see past installments of this series, make sure you click that follow button. Interesting self-defense tools of history, part 8. Man, I never realized how many weird weapons come from India. Anyways, hit follow. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I give you the scissor katar. At first glance, it kind of just looks like a handheld broadsword with some extra forearm protection. But the defining characteristic of this weapon is when you pulled back on that handpiece, the forked blade opened up to reveal a secret third blade. You see, once you were stabbed by that main blade, they would then pull back on the handle, which would open that blade up, thereby opening up the wound and causing more damage. It was also common practice to slather poison on that inner blade, so once it was closed, it protected the wielder, and it was only administered when the blade was already deep inside its victim. These prongs can also be used defensively in a similar fashion as a sai. Once open, you can capture an enemy blade, and with a quick flick of the wrist, disarm them. If you guys are liking this content, make sure you keep the party going by following, and commenting. Interesting self-defense tools of history, part 9. This one's for all of you Moana lovers, so go ahead and hit follow. Check out the mere ponamu, sacred weapon of the Maori chieftains. Where most weapons of the Maori culture were crafted out of wood, the mere was crafted out of jade. Now there's a whole legend about Maori himself dying in a goddess's vagina, thereby losing out on immortality for all of humanity. Yes, that is a thing, look it up, I'm not gonna get into it here. The point is, the end of this handle is crafted to resemble that of female genitalia. Basically, the last thing that you would see as the mere hit atop you would be the end of that weapon, thereby going out in a similar fashion as the namesake of the Maori. I mean, if you're gonna go out, I presume that there are worse ways. Alright guys, time to show me you love me by hitting that follow button and that like button, and let me know what we should do for future installments in the comments. Interesting self-defense tools of history, part 10. Alright guys, as the 10th installment in the series, I'm gonna end it here, but I'll make you a deal. 20,000 likes and we'll do some more. Check out the halade dagger. It's a knuckle duster style weapon of the Rajput clan, thought to be one of the first 3-bladed weapons ever conceived. Its design allowed you to punch like a boxer, but slash with the 2 curved blades on the end. Intuitive weapons such as this one are often favored in history because if you have any hand-to-hand combat training, you will instantly know how to use this weapon once it's placed in your hand. It also came in a 2-bladed model, which oddly enough made it a little bit more elegant and difficult to wield. Oftentimes the blade was serrated deeply so that it shoved itself deeper into the flesh. I thought it fitting to end this series with this weapon since it comes from India, and as we found out through this series, a lot of batshit stuff is coming out of India. Alright guys, those were my top 10 weird-ass self-defense tools of history. If you want to see more, 20,000 likes.